Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. As you know, this podcast is about what makes something fun, why it matters, and how to wield its mighty powers. Um, Not just a podcast about understanding the creative process about making something fun, but also in order to do that, you need to take care of the individual, the creative, the sensitive person, to make sure that their mental health is being looked after and they're empowered and they're able to make the choices that eventually make these fun things. And today I have a very special guest who is you've done everything: physician, neuroscientist, somatic intuitive, yoga instructor, meditation teacher, and my favorite, stand up comedian,
Sure.
uh, Dr. Russell Kennedy.
Hey,
How's it going?
thanks, guys. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really, before we get into more of the fun, what makes something fun, and into a little more about what you do with your studies and books about anxiety, I'm very curious about the stand-up comedian
Sure.
part. Um, what, where did that start in your life? When did you want to do that?
I think by the time like 18 or 19, I remember going to a comedy club and thinking, I'd really like to do that. That was a long time ago. And then, you know, things took over, right? You have to make a living, you have to you have to do what you have to do and that kind of thing. So I didn't start actually doing stand-up until I was 40. So I was full, my practice was in full swing, my medical practice, and then I just decided like I want to do something differently. And then a friend of mine who was a drug like a pharmaceutical representative, he ran the local comedy club. He was the MC for the local comedy club. So we said come down. So I went down there, and after about 5 shots of tequila, I went up there. It went fairly well. So it was I was back there every week doing little guest spots, and then when my friend had to leave town or whatever, I would host the comedy club that particular weekend. So I got a chance to meet a lot of comedians, and just was really like it was really fun. Like I said, I was just thinking about this last night when I was in bed. It was just like it was downstairs at this kind of upscale restaurant in Victoria, and it was called the Comedy Cellar.
Mhm.
And I remember just going down there, sitting at the bar, having a steak for dinner, and then just knowing I would go downstairs and just run the show that night. And it was just really fun. Like it was really, really fun to be able to go out there and just do what I like to do, and then you know exercise the right side of my brain for a change. Like the left side of my brain got a lot of work as a medical doctor. It's a lot of pattern recognition. It's a lot of the same thing. It's a lot of reassurance. But the right side of the brain never really got a whole lot of exercise as a medical doctor. So I got a chance to live the best out of both worlds. So that's kind of how the comedy thing started.
That's so cool. And did I would think, well, because so I've also been wanting to do stand up comedy. I've done improv on stage before,
Yep,
but it's a little easier because you're with a bunch of people. So,
exactly. Yeah, the
but
stand-ups and the improvs are kind of like the Sharks and the Jets. They each kind of look at each other like whatever. So the thing is, improv's really fun, and you got to think really on your feet really quickly. But stand-up, you're up there alone. So that was one of the things. I've done both. I like stand-up a little better. I like just being on my own up there. I think there's like living and dying by the sword, and I have done both. Believe me, I have died a horrible death on stage many, many times, but I've also done fairly well too. So it's kind of like, I think there's that anticipation. And as you get better at it, as you do it, 2, 3, 4, 500, 1,000 times, it's going to go fairly well, most
Mm,
of the time. So the nerves kind of drop away over the course of time and that kind of thing. And then you get a chance to do the stuff that you really enjoy doing, and just crowd work and just bouncing off people and enjoying
mm,
yourself. So that's kind of, when I went, and then when I went to Vancouver because I live in Victoria now, but Vancouver's kind of like the big city. And then there was three of us. Yuck Yucks is the big chain in Canada. Yuck Yucks is the big
mm.
comedy chain in Canada. And there was three of us at Vancouver Yuck Yucks. There was Brad McPeak, Phil Hanley, and myself. And Phil Hanley's still out there. Phil's still killing it. Like I follow him on YouTube, and he's really funny, and he was always excellent at crowd work, and he still does it. He still does it. So, I always tell people follow Phil on YouTube because he's really funny. Hanley, Phil Hanley. He's just hilarious. So there was the three of us that they would give stage to every week. So we knew that we could just build material and build material and build material. And it was just really fun to hang out with the gang. I mean, stand-up comics have a lot of psychopathology, without a doubt, But so I got a chance to work both on stage and with a lot of comedians, because they suffer, a lot of them, for sure.
That it's so funny because it reminds me of this is what, like, you've said a ton of insightful things that have like changed my life forever, but the thing that stood out the most is, I think you're on the Mel Robbins podcast, and you said that most people with anxiety are sensitive people, and
Yeah.
then Mel Robbins said, how do you know if you're sensitive? And then you said, well, you have anxiety.
Yeah. That's it. Things just don't roll off our back so much, as sensitive people, for sure. And I like to say that if you're born a sensitive person and you grow up in an attached, attuned environment with parents that are, attuned to you and look after your needs, you're probably going to be fine. But if you grow up sensitive, if you were born sensitive and you grow into a family that has a lot of trauma, it's not probably going to turn out that well.
Yeah.
I wonder, was it different, the creation process for the comedians who their living depended on it to be funny versus the ones who did it for fun?
I don't know. I think it's just in you. I think, it's one of those things that I think stand-up comedy chooses you. There's a lot of starving comedians, though. There's a lot of starving comedians. So I think that the writing process, if you're very good and very diligent about writing, you'll probably produce a lot of material. But I know it's hard to just sort of sit down and say, okay, what's funny? So I used to have a recorder at the time. Now I just use my phone. But if I would see something that I thought was very odd, in my environment, I would just, make a note of it. And then often that would sort of turn into comedy or jokes later on. But it's hard to just sit flat-footed and just, okay, what's funny? Like, it's like saying, list your 10 favorite songs for your, your workout playlist. It's so hard when you're actually thinking about it. It's so hard to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
Resonates.
So, yeah, especially with the going back to being a sensitive person, this is what I found is the biggest obstacle to a lot of creatives. So, quick backstory: I've been a game designer for 20 years. I worked for Walt Disney Imagineering. I made board games and VR attractions for amusement parks and stuff like that. And really, you live by the sword, you die by the sword. You are a creative person, but you kind of have to almost mute yourself, like block your emotions because you have so many touch points and there's so much that you want to do and you want to create, but you're also vulnerable in all these places. You're vulnerable to criticism, for sure. You're vulnerable to any kind of setback or failure. So it's almost like counterintuitive to a creative person to want to develop anything, because you're putting yourself out there and you're also sensitive to everything.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, it really does make sense. So yeah, because you want it to be good, and it's so often when you start doing something, it's so often not good when you first start doing it, right?
Yeah.
Like, do you have the ability? And I think that's where, doing stand-up comedy is like you live and die out there. When you're on there and you're the only one up there and you've got the microphone in your hand, you live and die by it. So it is one of those things where you kind of know that you have to produce and you have to, and here's the kind of the ironic part about stand-up is you have to kind of be relaxed doing it. The best stand-up comics are, they're relaxed. They're in that kind of zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so often when you just start doing it, it's so hard to get into that relaxed zone. Like you're either trying to make people laugh or you're trying to establish a rapport with the audience. And it's so hard to do that when you're an alarm yourself. And so many people, when they start doing comedy, are in this deep state of alarm. So one of the things that we use, is this sort of social engagement system that all human beings have, sort of eye contact, tone of voice, prosody of voice, which is kind of like the lilting up and down quality of the voice, facial expression, and body language. But when we get into alarm, all those things get shut off. So, you get people, and it's funny, I used to host a lot of kind of open mic nights for the comedy club. And you would see people with tremendous, comedic timing and skill, but they were so alarmed they had a really difficult time actually getting out there and doing it. And then you would see people that were just horrible. Like they had no idea of timing. They had no idea what was funny. And they would come off stage and they would think that they did well. And I would say, they're supposed to laugh, right? Like, that's what's supposed to happen. So just the level of delusion with some of the comedians or the early comics was really funny. And often the most sensitive ones were the ones that were the most funny, but they were also the most alarmed as well. So they had to work their way through that. And the only way you do that is just get stage time. Just keep going up, keep doing it, going. Just keep going every time, because that's what allows you the confidence to kind of go, okay, I can relax. I'm not under the gun here as much as I'm on stage by myself. Like I've done this before. I can wait. I can pause. That's the other thing, is just that ability to pause is so important in comedy. If you look at the really good comedians, a lot of it's just when they're pausing, like they're not saying anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so interesting, because you have to be calm and cool and comfortable to be able to. Yeah, that's super hard. It's so interesting. So Pauline and I talk a lot about, we're both creatives. I actually used to be her boss like a year ago, but we also talk a lot about like anxiety, because that's very common for us, and we've come to this interesting place where it almost seems like we're driven by anxiety, like we're able to achieve more because of the anxiety. And how does that, but it's obviously not healthy. So how can you keep that drive while not suffering? I don't know if that's possible.
No, I think it is true. I think just knowing, because a lot of times we use the anxiety to drive us forward, for sure. And then we learn through operant conditioning that, hey, maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, hey, this driving force actually makes me successful. It makes me accomplish things. Now, but it's kind of like being on a treadmill. You can go on a treadmill for 10 minutes and be fine. But if you're on a treadmill for 10 hours, you're going to be not fine. It's not going to be good for you, right? So it's realizing when you can shut it off. And I think that's part of it, is that we learn specifically as children that this is an energizing force, but we never really learn as children to shut it off, because usually the trauma in childhood is almost never ending. So if you have an alcoholic parent or an abusive parent, or you're raised in a family with a lot of yelling and screaming and arguing, you never really learn how to shut it off. So it learns how to be your friend on some level. And that makes it hard for me to treat you, because there's part of you that believes that the anxiety is actually helpful, right? So when I start showing you that you can actually live with a little bit of peace, you can actually put down your tools, you can actually relax, that childhood pattern in you starts to scream like, no, we have to be hyper vigilant. We can't rest. If we rest, something will happen. And often this is true with when you grow up with a family that has trauma, because there'll be a trauma and then there'll be this sort of period of sort of calm. Like this is the classic sort of alcoholic parent kind of thing. The alcoholic parent goes on a bender and like explodes. And then there's a few days where they're apologetic and I'll never do it again, that kind of stuff. And then there's this quiescent period, but it always explodes again. So we learn as children, like, don't get too relaxed, because this is all just going to explode again. So it makes it really, really difficult to put down that anxiety, because we believe that anxiety is keeping us safe. Like, what if something blows up again? At least I'm prepared. At least I'm ready. Yeah. And, most often, and Brene Brown talks about that too. She says, no matter how often you practice that call from the school saying that your kid's been injured or whatever, it doesn't help. Like, it doesn't, if it actually happens, it doesn't help you. But there is this thing that anxiety kind of tells us, if we remain hypervigilant, that we can be somewhat prepared for being blindsided. So you live your whole life being prepared to be blindsided, which is very difficult for one and exhausting for another.
Mhm.
So how do you develop that switch? Because I feel like as a creator, and I often talk to Joe about this, how me as a creator, the best motivation I had in the past was when I was anxious. And it gives
Right.
you the best drive. And you learn, and I follow your work, and I, learn a lot about mental health, and I went to therapy, and I felt like, in a way, it calmed me down. But in creative process, it made me a little complacent. And I always, it's more sustainable now, but I
Right.
always kind of, sometimes I'm a little sentimental, I must admit.
Yeah.
And I look back and I think, oh my God, like in the times when I felt the most anxious, I had the biggest drive to create. And so, how do you develop that switch?
Well, not everybody's like that, Paulina, too. It's like sometimes when your anxiety is high, you go into freeze. So that's the thing too. So it's that fine line of harnessing the energy, but not going so far into the red zone that you can't think clearly and you can't work clearly. So it's not unusual for being like high anxiety, being highly creative. That's not unusual, but people over the course of time, typically they start to burn out. They start using that, and it's almost like if you keep an engine at the red zone all the time, eventually the engine's going to break down. And that typically is what happens. So it's, can you learn how to use the anxiety in a way? And it's really fundamentally connecting with that child in you. I mean, that's really how we heal from anxiety. And I know for a fact that since I have become more peaceful and calm within myself, I've become much more creative. I've experienced
Mhm.
things that creation that's been far beyond what I used to do as a medical doctor or a comedian or whatever. Like just in that piece, there is just such this creative flow that comes, and it's not from being forced. It's not like someone's, you're walking the plank and someone's got a sword in your back. It's like there is that sense like, oh, I can wait. And when I wait, more things come to me. So I think that it's an illusion, I think, on some level that we're ultimately at our highest creative potential when we're also at our highest level of activation. So I think on some level, yes, it activates you, and I think that's why anxiety is there in the first place, because we need to be active to get out of the situation that we're in. But if you're an 8-year-old and your mother hits you, there's no escape from that. Right. So you're basically living with that for the next 8 or 10 or 12 years. So there's no way of getting out of that. So it's a way of kind of understanding that if I actually let myself relax, which is a hard thing for people, that I will actually become more productive. But your ego won't let you that. Like your ego dragon will freak out. It'll say, no, we got to keep going. We got to keep using this anxiety, because the ego wants to keep you in exactly the same anxious place because it believes it's helping you. It believes that hypervigilance and that anxiety is actually keeping you safe, when it's actually slowly, kind of eroding your energy by keeping you on that treadmill for 10 hours at a time.
Mm. That's actually the first time I ever thought that a person can be calm and creative.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
what you just said.
And it's different though, Joe. I don't mean to interrupt you, but it's a different creativity. Like it's a different level, because I think when I was really anxious, I was able to really relate to people with anxiety so much better. Now that my mind is more calm, like I have less ability to really connect with people who are in that real anxious phase. Now, my mother is not doing well lately. And I had this legal issue with, one of my book agents and stuff like that. So that kind of blew up in my face. So that actually gave me a little taste of what I used to feel like, and it's not, this version I've gone through lately is nowhere near what I used to go through even 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. But I remember thinking, oh, this is what people are feeling now, because I've been so, it's not that I've been anxiety free by any means at all. I mean, I deal with a form of alarm every single day, but usually I just don't give it any credibility anymore. So it doesn't build into my thoughts. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. I know I'm kind of rambling today, but I think you're both creative, so you understand. So when I get into this active phase, my mind works a mile a minute, and I believe that it's helping me. But what it actually does is it wears me out. So I can relate, because I've been going through this stressful period in my life the last couple, 2-3 weeks, actually longer than that. And it's like, oh, this is what I used to feel like. This is what the people that come to me for help are feeling. And it's like, okay, how do I help them? It's like, well, what you do is you find the alarm in your body, which is your younger self, right? And you put your hand over it and you connect with it. And you just allow that younger version of you just to relax. They won't be able to, of course, when you first start doing this, but if you're very diligent about really connecting with that alarm in your body, because I believe that alarm that shows up in your body, whether it's your solar plexus, your heart, or your throat, or whatever, that is your younger self. And there's a bunch of neuroscience behind that, but I'm not going to go into that. But it's basically, there is a representation in your body that your brain makes when you're traumatized as a child. And that emotional signature, that signature of discomfort in your body now when you're feeling anxious, is probably exactly the same feeling that you had in your body when you were 7 years old and your dad wasn't coming home, or you were 12 years old and you were skipping school and you were completely petrified that you're going to get caught. Like, it's exactly the same feeling. So we feel the same now the way that we did back then when the trauma was occurring. So our mind basically starts making up stories. This is where I was going with that originally. So what I do now is, like, I feel the alarm in my body. I reassure that younger version of me. I put my hand over it. And I know that I don't actually have to hitch up all these thoughts to it. Because as soon as I create the thought that goes along with the feeling, oh, what if mom dies? What if this cost me $50,000? As soon as I start hooking those thoughts up, the alarm just gets worse and worse. And of course, the thoughts get worse and worse too. So not only do we, as human beings, make more worries when we're in survival mode, but we paralyze the part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, the front part of our brain, that would actually tell us these worries aren't actually accurate. So one, we make more threats because we're feeling under threat. And two, we lose the part of our brain that would reassure us. So we get hit twice, essentially. So I think a lot of my healing has been from just allowing the alarm to be there, reassuring the younger version of me, because that's where the alarm is coming from, and not compulsively hooking a story to the feeling. So Paulina, one of your stories is that I'm not productive unless I'm anxious, which is dangerous, because you need to be productive. Yeah, exactly. But then when you realize, it's like, okay, that's a story. That's a projection. That's something that I've created inside my mind. What if that's not true? What if I don't have to add thoughts to the alarm? What if I can instead focus on the feeling of it and staying with the feeling of it? Now, that's not easy either, right? Because sometimes that feeling is from deep, emotional, physical, sometimes sexual abuse. So it's really hard to kind of go, oh, just stay with the feeling and you'll metabolize it. Sometimes it's too intense. Like, sometimes you need a somatic therapist or an IFS therapist or someone who's really familiar with helping you move that emotion through your body, so that you can, in the future, you can feel that emotion. It's not comfortable by any means at all, but you're able to connect to it because it's the younger version of you, so that's how you learn how to be able to, in the long term, deal with it. And Bessel van der Kolk talks about that in The Body Keeps the Score. He says, we're not getting people to get rid of their anxiety, because we can't do that. But what we can do is get them to acclimatize to this sense in their body and not completely freak out and go into the worries and the ruminations and the what ifs and the warnings and the worst case scenarios in their mind. Once they realize, oh, I'm alarmed, my body's alarmed, I have to pay attention to that, rather than just automatically and without thinking going into my head and trying to solve it with my mind, which I won't be able to, because if you could solve your worries with your mind, your worries would last about 8 seconds.
Right.
I love that. I feel like this gives hope to everyone. I actually know a lot of people, because I grew up in Slovakia in Eastern Europe, and when I was growing up, there wasn't as much awareness about mental health.
Right.
And I feel like I knew a lot of people in creative community without admitting it. I think they wouldn't seek mental health professionals because they were afraid that they would lose all of this, lose all of the drive. But I feel like what you're saying gives hope to such people. And
Yeah.
that was definitely me 10 years ago. So
And just realizing that it's your ego, it's that overprotective ego, that part of you that wants to keep you safe, because it just wants to keep you safe. But what it assumes, the ego assumes, is that I'm keeping you safe by keeping you hypervigilant. I'm keeping you safe by keeping you worried, because if you're worried, you're not going to get blindsided, because probably as a child, you probably got blindsided, typically by one of your parents. You know, so it's one of those things that it's like, I'm never going to get blindsided again. But it's like, you know, sitting on your front porch, you know, every moment of every day for 3 months, waiting for, you know, a burglar to come. Like, okay, you know, like, you know, maybe you might stop the burglar, but A, the burglar's probably not coming. And 2, you're going to be exhausted because every day you're anticipating this thing that never happens.
yeah. But you know what? I was telling Joe about this. The thing was that I grew up in 90s. I was born 3 years after the fall of Iron Curtain.
Okay.
And there was this it was growing up in this environment where people were scared.
Yeah.
And some people got over it very quickly, but the rest of people lived in this weird apathy. So it was this weird aftermath of people living under a non-democratic regime and that worked with fear. And so it was very interesting looking back how it was everywhere where I looked around, there was fear. And so it's very interesting to reflect back and to
and we're wired for that too. Like, we're wired for as human beings, we're not wired to be happy. We're wired to survive and find a partner and create more babies. Like, that's how we're wired, right? So we're not wired to be happy. We're wired to be very goal directed. And I think that you know, that hurts us in a lot of ways, in that we can't just put down the energy for a while, and that's why people resist meditation and that kind of thing, is that, you know, people with anxiety typically hate meditation, at least when they start, because that's when their mind starts going nuts. Because basically, if you think about meditation, what you're doing is you're saying, okay, mind, you can relax now. And if you've lived your whole life since your childhood going, I can't relax, my mind has to keep going because that's what keeps me safe, meditation probably isn't going to go well for you. So I think it's just learning that meditation for anxiety is one of the most powerful things that you can do, but you have to start slowly. You have to start like just a minute at a time, you know, once a day for a week, and then maybe 2 minutes, or maybe 2 1-minute episodes, you know, for another week. Because what I see with people with anxiety, especially creatives, is they go, oh, I've heard meditation's great. I will sit down for 10 minutes and I will meditate and I will feel better after it. And the opposite happens. Like, they go through hell for 5 minutes before they say, I can't friggin' do this anymore. And then the other thing that happens is I am never doing that again. Right. Yeah. So it's like, start off easy, you know, and it's the same thing I was saying before about, you know, finding this alarm in your body and seeing it as your younger wounded self. It's like, start off with that very slowly. You know, you can't just sort of sit in there and say, I love the child in me. I love the child. It's not going to work. In fact, it's probably going to freak both of you out, you and the child. It's like, they're not used to you being connected to them, the adult part. And the child and the adult doesn't want to go back to the child because the child holds all their pain. So that's what I talk about anxiety. It's like, I have this slide that when I do presentations, and it's this concrete block with this big crack right down the middle of it. And on one side, I write anxiety is basically a separation of your mind and your body on one, and then your adult self from your child self. That's what anxiety truly is. So Gordon Neufeld, my mentor in developmental psychology, had this term, and he called it all anxiety is separation anxiety, which I believe is true. It's all from separation of some kind. And then I added to that, and it's mostly separation from yourself. So when we're children and there's trouble in our family of origin, children blame themselves. They don't blame the parents, no matter how abusive the parent is. You know, there's this great saying that says, if you abuse, neglect, or abandon a child, the child doesn't stop loving the parent, they stop loving themselves. And then at that point, when they stop loving themselves, they start thinking about all these reasons why they're bad. You know, I can't keep still. I can't get my schoolwork done. I can't do this. So it just grows in them. So that's what happens, is we create this inner critic inside of us at, 3, 4, 5, 12 years old. and it creates a tremendous amount of alarm in our system. And it's the alarm in the body that creates the anxiety of the mind. It's not the anxiety of the mind that creates the alarm in the body. Now, it is both, but primarily the main reason why people have anxiety is this alarm that's been held in their body, usually from trauma from childhood, not always. Paulina, as you were saying, if you grow up in a warlike environment or an environment where there's a lot of trauma, that gets handed down too. If you look at, Jewish children of Holocaust survivors, they have a much higher rate of anxiety and depression than the general population, even if they're raised, in these loving, caring homes, because we do get trauma that's transmitted into us from an intergenerational from our ancestors. And a lot of people don't understand how that works. And we don't really understand scientifically, but there is a lot of evidence suggesting it can be in non-coding DNA or non-coding RNA or the sperm or whatever. But it's being shown quite clearly that traumatic cultures transmit the trauma to their kids.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, my dad was notorious for rushing everywhere for no reason. Like like we would go to Disneyland and then be home by noon.
Oh my God.
And I rush around for no reason.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I do it. And then I found out from my dad like a few months ago that he said that his dad would rush around for no reason.
Yes. Yeah.
I was like,
well, this is where we get into determinism. Like, you guys are really like charging me up here, because every time you're saying something, I'm jumping in there because it's so, but this is about determinism. Like, how much of your own predilections, how much of your own things that you like are actually were burned into you when you were born, and you think, oh, I'm a stubborn person because I didn't get this when I was younger. It's like, no, you were probably just born a stubborn person, and this is how it's showing up. So that's why it's like determinism. It's like this. So much of our lives, I believe, are just pre-programmed, and or at least the groove is in us to be that way. And then we if the groove is in you, you will naturally kind of be good at those kind of things. If being good at being stubborn is a thing.
Yeah.
So you will naturally kind of become the person you were designed to be by your blueprint. It takes a lot to go outside of that. So there's certain traits that run through my family. One of them is worry, and I'm trying to break that trait for my daughter and my grandkids, because people will come to me and say, can you work with my 15-year-old son, or can you work with my 8-year-old daughter? And it's like, no, I'll work with you first, because that's what they're probably getting the anxiety from, right? They're probably reading you, and then that energy is going into them, and in them trying to control you or make you better, they're making themselves worse. So it's just this whole determinism thing of like how we are sort of born with this certain template. I think we can go outside it a little bit, but I think the traits are in us. They're just in us.
Yeah. I won't jump into this topic, but I've been studying astrology for like 12 years.
Yep.
And I think there's definitely something to it.
Well, there's the pattern recognition, right? Like there's certain patterns, and I don't know enough about it and that kind of thing too. But I think the human being has a tremendous confirmation bias.
Mm-hmm.
There was a study they did a while ago, and they said, oh, this person's a Taurus. They have this, this, and this, and this. And it's like, yes, they do. They for sure they do. It's like, yeah, but there's also we want to believe in this stuff. Like, we really want to believe in it. So we will see what we want to see, and the stuff that doesn't quite fit, it's like, well, we'll just ignore that. And that's true of human beings. That's true of like human beings across the board. If you look at like Trump, for example, there's people that just think that he's the world's greatest guy in the world, and there's people that hate him. So it's kind of like, okay, well, somewhere in there, but it's so like subjective. The perception is so subjective. And then so if you love Trump and you see something that's great about Trump, you automatically believe it. Doesn't matter how far-fetched it is. Trump went to Mars when he was a child. Oh, really? Okay. But if there's something bad about him, like, whatever, it's like you will automatically believe what you already believe. So it's so hard to go outside of that confirmation bias that we already have, right? So Paulina, when you say I'm only really productive when I'm anxious, that becomes a confirmation bias. So the times you were calm and you created something that was amazing when you were just like Zen, don't even think about that anymore, right? But when you were, hyped up on caffeine and anxious and you created this great thing, that becomes what you believe in.
That's true.
Yeah.
I try to do both approaches, but
Yeah.
it's interesting that some days when I feel like I need to be more alert, I'll find some alarms that will get me to that zone.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's the drive I need today. But
Yeah.
I do understand that that's not sustainable. So I'll only.
Well, it also gets away on you too. That's the thing. Like if we could control, like, okay, I wanna dial my anxiety up to a 7 because that's gonna get me really active and I'm gonna be able to think, and but unfortunately, we're up to a 7, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's up to an 8 now. Oh, it's up to a 9 now. It's like, I can't control this anymore.
Yeah.
This is not what I planned. It's like going on a roller coaster, and it's like, I thought this was gonna be like scary, but not like this. So if we could control it, if we could sort of have a dial on how much anxiety or activation we had, great. But we don't, because often what we do is we create the anxiety and then it just overruns us. It gets out of control. So
that's funny. So I'm curious. So I've been studying what makes something fun for about 13, 14 years of my career, specifically. Universally through movies, games, TV shows, whatever medium. And so I've sort of hit on something where it's kind of feels like, oh, this is kind of true throughout all of my experiences and things I've worked on and people I've interviewed. I'm curious for you, though, on your path, because the whole time I was trying to figure out my anxiety, because I'm putting myself out there on stage, like I did pro wrestling and stuff like that.
Okay.
And but I had to stop because the anxiety was like too much.
Like what anxiety? Like performance anxiety, or were you afraid of being judged? Like what was that, Joe?
So specifically, when I was 21 and I wanted to be a pro wrestler, ironically, my biggest thing was stage fright, which is like kind of core to being a pro wrestler. And so I was great. I was great in the ring. I was very athletic at the time. I had a really strong character that I believed in. I just didn't want to be seen by anyone.
Okay.
And I did not, I just couldn't, I just could not deal with it at all.
Yeah.
And so for creatives, it does stop you from expressing yourself, because that's a huge part of it. So I've tried for like 40-ish years or whatever to try to get rid of my anxiety. I read all kinds of books, but your program, Anxiety Prescription, Anxiety RX, was a game changer for me. And I want to know when did it click for you? Like, how did you know you're onto something different or something unique?
I think it was gradual. Like there wasn't some eureka moment. Like, oh my God, I found the healing cure. I think it was just somewhere just past psychedelics. Because I did, let's see, ayahuasca. I did MDMA, which classically isn't a psychedelic. LSD. Mm-hmm. And they all blew the back of my head off, except for MDMA. MDMA is like you love everybody, and But the psychedelics blew the back of my head off because they gave me no choice in where I was going. So I remember being on ayahuasca, thinking I was falling and falling and falling and falling, and there was no end. It was like a bottomless pit kind of thing. So 2 years after psychedelics and that kind of thing, I'm kind of like, okay, what's going on? Like I started feeling more anxiety. So I really had to look into, okay, what is actually going on? And then I don't remember exactly how this, but I started looking into my body, and I know what it was. It was LSD. So LSD showed me that my anxiety that I thought was in my head was actually in my body. It's in my solar plexus. It's purple, it's sharp, it's hot, it's a pressure and a pain, pushes up into my heart, pushes into my back. That's my anxiety. So that's what I learned on ayahuasca. So then I kind of refined that over the years that went past that. And I thought, okay, let's see if I can make friends with this part. Let's see if I can just allow myself to feel it, allow myself to feel how uncomfortable it is. And then after I did that for a little while, it was like, okay, I would get shades of my younger self, shades of like watching my dad go to the mental hospital or that kind of stuff. And it's like, I wonder if this alarm that's in my solar plexus is the younger version of me that's just afraid and it's still in me. So I started playing with that a little bit. And I was like, okay, well, this actually helps. Like I'm feeling like I'm on the right track. It wasn't like I felt better immediately by any means at all, but there was this sense like, hey, this is actually the root cause of your anxiety. And the root cause of your anxiety is this alarm that's in your body. And the alarm that's in your body is actually the child that's in you, right? The scared child.
Mm.
So if I can use my adult self now to connect with my child self back then and show them they're seen, heard, loved, and protected, what would that do? And I just noticed that I started worrying less. I would start getting into less and less sympathetic overdrive, like less and less sweats and freakouts and that kind of thing. And just this feeling that I was on the right track with this connecting with this younger version of me. And then I just refined it and refined it and refined it. And it's worked for me. So that's why I sort of put it out to everybody. Now I give you the very short version of it, but that's basically how it happened, is that I found the alarm in my body. The alarm is my younger self. And that younger self needs my attention. And that's why I said about the adult self separated from the child self and the mind separated from the body. So once I started connecting the adult self to the child in me, that child started feeling safer, and then it stopped creating so much activation in my body. So it allowed me to kind of have some more Zen moments and even see that I don't actually have to add all these horrible thoughts to this, because your mind is a compulsive meaning-making, make sense machine. So if you're feeling alarmed in your body, your mind will automatically give you all the horrible things that could happen to you in the next 15 seconds. So it is one of those things that I just learned, like, hey, I can actually sit with this feeling. It's not comfortable by any means at all, but I don't have to do anything with it. Like, it's not getting worse, I guess is the way I would put it. And it's like, okay, well, what if I just keep doing this every day? How does that affect it? And over time, that child started showing me more sensations, images, memories of my childhood, and I had a chance to kind of metabolize them. So it was like I could feel them. It's like, yeah, that was very painful, but now in this grounded state in my body, and again, I'm accelerating this process quite a bit. Now in this grounded state in my body, that episode of bullying in grade 4 doesn't really hurt me that much anymore. Like it doesn't have the same charge anymore. So I think, it's for me, it's all about using the body as a way of neutralizing those old traumas. Because like I said earlier, I think that the body feels the same way now as it did back when the original trauma was happening. And we also, when we go into that feeling, because it's so intense that it takes us over as adults, even if we're 50 or 60 years old, it still takes us over. So if we learn that is our younger version of ourselves, and that we can find that younger version of ourselves, see them, love them, hear them, and protect them. And this is gradual too. Like they won't, you can't go up to your younger self and say, hey, I love you now, because they're going to be like, nah, you haven't loved me for 50 years. I'm not going to believe you yet. So it's really, it's this gradual process, and it feels very disingenuous. Like some people I will get to put a picture of themselves up when they were like 8 years old, when their parents were getting a divorce. Find a picture of yourself, put it up in your bathroom mirror, and talk to it every day. And the first 2 months, it's going to feel like the weirdest thing in the world. But after a while, because that child wants to connect with you and you want to connect with that child, it starts happening. And you start creating this connection within yourself. And then you show that alarmed child in you that they are actually safe. They're not back there. They're not 4, 8, 12 years old anymore. They're adult you. And you have a lot more choice and agency in the matter now than you ever did back then. And then that's when you started to heal. And that's basically what a lot of my writings are about. A lot of my healing. There's more sort of neuroscientific, there's some cognitive stuff in there too, but mostly the crux of healing is finding the pain in your body and learning how to deal with that pain and learning how to stay with it. And like I said, some people have severe emotional, physical, sexual abuse, and you can't do this on your own. Like it's just, way too overwhelming to be able to sit with that pain. So you need someone else to be able to kind of like echo that back to you and show you that you're safe. Like someone who should have been there when you were a child, like a parent, right? So that's what a good somatic therapist will do, is start giving you some grounding into being able to stay with yourself, stay with that uncomfortable feeling. And with other people, I'll say, what was the best time in your life? Like, oh, when we got married, when I first met my husband, my wife, or whatever, we went on this trip, and we went camping through the Grand Canyon, and we were so connected, and we were having so much fun with each other. It's like, okay, well, take that feeling in your body. Like, where do you feel that? It's like, oh, my chest, my throat, whatever. Now let's mix that together with this feeling of this purple monster that's in your chest. Let's just swish it all together and see what comes of it. So in a way, we're kind of, giving that old program, that old alarm program, a bit of a lobotomy. We're going in there and just shaking it up a little bit. And then when we do that, it changes it. And when it changes it, it weakens it. So we don't have that same automatic, reflexive thing that goes up into our head when that old alarm gets triggered. We don't reflexively go up in our head and start worrying anymore. My big thing with people is that they don't spend enough time in their body until they go up into their head, and that you learn that you basically worry kind of distracts you from the pain. And in a way, that's true. If the pain's in your body and you go up in your head and you start ruminating and worrying, you're not feeling that pain in your body so much anymore. So there is this sort of 0.4 of a second where you feel better. And your brain, being, an organism that wants to feel better, follows that worry pattern. So we get addicted to worry because for the first half a second, that worry actually makes us feel better. But after that, it makes us even more scared. So you get locked in this cycle that you can't get out of. So it's just learning that, you have to be able to find that younger version of yourself, see them, love them, and protect them, and show them over time. And that's how you ultimately heal.
I do want to mention that I did get the MBRX system.
Okay.
The weekend it came out, I was waiting for
it. Great. And how you found it?
Super effective. Like the first time I did it, it was like the exercise. I don't know if you want to spoil it.
No, you process. Can talk about it.
But like it felt like obvious almost after I was done.
It is.
I'm like, why was I scared this whole time? It's not like, if it was me today, it's like nothing. And like I sort of connected with myself as a kid, because I'm also in the same house where it happened.
Oh, really? Okay.
And
there's a few people I talk to that are in the same house they were when they were anxious as a child.
Yeah. And it was
on the other side of Earth.
Yeah, exactly. Have you ever been back, Paulina? Have you ever been back to you?
Yeah, I go all the
How do you feel when you go back?
There's some alarms.
Yeah.
Also, the same behaviors are still in place with people who are still there. But it's it's people like you and other professionals that taught me how to work with those alarms. So I'm really grateful to you.
Yeah, no, I love talking to people that are getting something out of the work, because one of the things that bothers me is that there is so much misinformation about anxiety out there that it can be fixed by just, change your thoughts. We're so raw mind, we worship the mind. It's like, yes, your mind can fix it. It's like, no, anxiety is a problem of overthinking, and you're not going to solve a problem of overthinking by giving you more thinking.
Yeah.
So it's funny, but that, I think, is really important to understand, that it has to be done through your body first. And then, of course, the cognitive stuff is helpful. It really is. But it's only helpful once you've established this sort of root in your body, so that these cognitive things have a place to root and stay and be a part of your life. But if you just learn how to think differently, the problem is that when you get into survival mode, that part of your brain, the front part of your brain that shuts off, that's the part of your brain that would tell you to use these cognitive structures, right? So here's you have all this thing. Okay, when the worry comes up, I'm going to use this, and this. The worry comes up, this part gets paralyzed, and all that's gone.
Yeah. It's so crazy. Last thing I want to bring up before we finish up here. you had mentioned that one of the parts, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but one thing to help with healing is play, is to
Yeah.
be able to play.
Yeah.
And I want to sort of, in a nutshell, describe my life's work, and I
Sure.
want to see like how well it maps to what you're doing. So
Sure.
so basically, the entirety of what makes something fun is it starts off with clarity. So the person has to know what this is all about, even.
Okay.
So yeah, the latest Dune movie that came out was a bad example of clarity because you
Okay.
didn't know what was going on in the movie or
Right.
these characters or anything. Clarity is first. After that is engagement. Now the person has to focus. They have to care about what's going on.
Right.
Once they care, then there's tension. So there's an unknown element, there's stakes, things like that. Then when the tension is cut by discovery, that's what makes something fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so you need to do that whole sequence. But the key is that whole sequence needs to be preceded by safety.
Yeah.
There needs to be psychological safety.
Right.
So if you don't have safety, that whole thing is terrifying.
Right.
That
No,
whole
it's true.
cycle. Yeah. And so oftentimes I think, a lot of times I feel like we just don't feel safe, period. And life is just scary
Totally.
when it could all be a learning experience.
I think that's absolutely true. And I really do think that we're searching for safety all the time, and we search for safety in our own beliefs. And I think that's why we're becoming more tribal as a society. Because if you believe something different than I do, and I'm using my beliefs to keep me safe, and your beliefs conflict with mine, there's going to be a problem there. There's going to be a lot of problems. So here's my thing about fun. So fun basically activates the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system at the same time. So if you're playing hockey, and ice hockey that I used to do, my knees aren't good anymore, so I don't. But there is this excitement. It's like we want to win. We want to win this side. But there's also this sort of safety in that this is my team. They'll look after me. I'll be okay. So what happens in fun is we activate the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight nervous system, and we also activate the rest and digest nervous system the safety nervous system at the same time. Now, the only other time that those two things get co-activated is trauma.
That's
so when
interesting.
you're traumatized as a child, your sympathetic activation goes up, your fight or flight goes up. And then the parasympathetic comes in to kind of shut everything down, because it's like, we're getting too active. We're going to have to shut this down. So when you go into fun and you realize that you can challenge yourself neurologically and still be safe, that contradicts what happened when you were a child, because you were challenged, but you weren't safe. So it's a way. So I believe that fun is one of those ways that we can actually re-experience our old trauma unconsciously, like we're not bringing it in consciously, and process it in a way now when we're having fun that we never did back then. So that's my sort of neuroscientific explanation of co-activation of the autonomic nervous system, parasympathetic and sympathetic, in play, and how the only other time that we co-activate those systems is in trauma. So if we can go back and we are safe in this co-activated place, then it sort of goes back and transfers into the times where we were co-activated as children and had no way out. Then we can start actually creating a pathway out of that particular neural structure that maintains our fear, that maintains our worry.
Yeah. And there's related to that almost mapping on it directly. There's a speech given by some Imagineers, and I forgot their names, at AWE last year. I think you were there, Paulina, where they talked about transformation. And transformation is about putting someone in a world, then having basically tension, having some sort of risk like life or death, and then they learn something from it, and that's transformation. And it's kind of like, the same steps is that.
And comedy is the same thing too. Like if you look at the way comedy is structured, it's like something doesn't make sense. And then in an instant, what the comedian says makes the whole thing make sense. And for some reason in the human brain, that creates laughter.
Yeah. The reason why it's discovery specifically instead of surprise
Yeah.
is because discovery is true to the world you've been building.
Okay.
So if that thing shines a new light on the information, it's satisfying,
Right.
and it's fun. Part of why it's fun is because you're learning. You're like, oh, that's what all this means, or whatever. Especially if they figure it out for themselves, the audience.
And that's all dopamine too. So dopamine is the molecule of more. It's the molecule that gets secreted when we start learning something, when we feel like we're on the right track. And tracking it back to what I was saying earlier, when you start seeing that your anxiety in your mind is actually the state of alarm in your body, and you start treating that alarm in your body as if it was the younger version of you, you go on the right track. You start thinking, oh, I'm on the right track, which of course makes some dopamine and sometimes some oxytocin, because you're connecting with that younger version of you. So that's how things wind up resolving. So we use those two things together, because when dopamine gets secreted when we feel like we're on the right track. And then some of the times that I say with people is that, they've had anxiety for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And in one session, they feel better because they know the answer. They know what they have to do, instead of just, being told they have to think better or do something like that. They know. They haven't done it yet. They're still a long way away from it, but at least they know what they have to do now. They know what they have to do. And when it's in your grasp, you can be the agent of your own healing. But if we have to depend on counselors and psychiatrists and medications and all that kind of stuff, it puts us in this victim mentality. And while you're a victim, you just can't heal. And while you're a victim, you can't have fun either.
Yep.
If I can ask, is there any... I know there are no quick fixes, but I'm curious about this because me and Joe actually worked on immersive experiences, immersive training, so for VR and AR. And a lot of this was for onboarding for corporate clients, for their employees. But there's always this idea: how do you immerse the learners to deliver the learning content? And my aspiration is to work with maybe people who are not so well focused, and maybe they do have the amygdala hijack, and immersive media has a great potential because it separates you from the world. So I wonder, is there any quick fix if there's amygdala hijack?
I don't think there's any. Well, I mean, just going into your breath. I mean, basically, that's probably the fastest way of connecting with your parasympathetic nervous system, is going. And there's something called the physiological sigh that Dr. Andrew Huberman talks about, where you take 2 sniffs in really deep and then long, slow breath out. So that immediately starts relaxing the autonomic nervous system. Now, when you're saying there about, immersive media and stuff, my friend Arash Javanbakht, he is the head of the STARC Research Center, which is Stress and Anxiety Research Center at Wayne State University in Michigan. He's creating these augmented realities. So if people are afraid of, say, spiders, he'll put the augmented reality thing on them. They will walk into a room that looks exactly like a room. He will actually be in the room with them in virtual reality, and he will expose them to a spider that it isn't real. And at the end of an hour session, they have a tarantula in a cage there at the research center, and people will either touch the tarantula or touch the cage. So this is something that I see as being a wave of the future. And what I've talked to him about is like, hey, can you make a younger version of me? So me, Rusty at 12 years old, that looks like me, sounds like me, acts like me, says things like me, that I can have a conversation with this augmented reality and say, hey, you're actually safe. You know what? We turned out okay. Like we turned out great. Like you're okay. I will look after you. And there's something about context, like being in that context where I'm with him and he's with me, and we actually feel like it's happening. It's not like imagine, sit back, imagine your younger self and connecting with them. You're not. You're actually in that. That's what I find really exciting, and that's why I'm working with Arash on that. So I can hook you guys up because he would be a fantastic, I think, podcast guest for you guys too. So I will set you guys up with him and that kind of thing too. And because I think that's where we're going. I think psychedelics and that kind of stuff are great. I think they do open up things But I think this augmented reality holds, in my opinion, holds the most promise, because the reason I think people are anxious in the first place is they've lost touch with that younger version of themselves. So if they actually had a younger version of themselves in real time to talk to and interact with, I think it would be kind of like, it's kind of like, if you lose a parent that you love dearly, and then an AI version of that parent comes along. Now, it's not really the parent, but there's a tremendous amount of healing that could happen if you were actually believed on some level, at some unconscious level, that this is the parent that was gone, and you wanted to ask them all these questions. I really think that that's the wave of the future as far as healing from just about any mental disorder, but specifically anxiety.
I think we're like 2 or 3 years away from that. I think that
Not
would be
too far. Not
pretty
too
close,
far. Yeah.
Pretty close.
Oh, then I'll make it.
We probably could,
yeah. Well, I'll send you pictures of myself, and you can make me a rusty avatar, me at 12. That would be great.
Nice project for me, Joe.
For sure.
So this was awesome, Russ. This is super informative. Probably my favorite episode of all time. Thank you so much for coming on here,
guys. Yeah. You're welcome, Joe, Paulina. Yeah. And you know how to find me. So that kind of thing. I am getting busier all the time now. That's one of the things that I've noticed, that I've started to. I'm not doing as many podcasts because there's bigger publishers that want to buy my book, so I'm going to have to revise the book and do a new audiobook and stuff like that. So I'm moving away from podcasting a little bit over the next 6 months, but I will be back. And you know how to find me. And if you have any questions, like, I'm really interested in, Paulina, your creative ideas about anxiety. How it affects you, and same with you, Joe. Like, this stuff charges me up because I only know my own anxious mind. I love hearing about other people's anxious minds and how it works for them or doesn't work for them, because it makes the stuff that I put out that much more broadly applicable to everybody.
Yeah, I'm definitely down for sharing.
Awesome.
All of my anxieties. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Russ.
You're welcome. See you later, guys.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.